You're good.
I would like to thank the Tennessee Academy for allowing me to present the topic of when all else fails, the 12-step method for long-term recovery from compulsive overeating and morbid obesity. Currently in this country and around the world, we are facing a significant epidemic, which is obesity. According to UpToDate, the current prevalence of obesity in adults in this country is up to 42.4%. Projections suggest that by the year 2030, 50% of this country's adults will be obese, and that almost 25% of these adults will be morbidly obese. It should also be noted at this time that at least 30% of children and adolescents are either overweight or obese. We, as physicians, all know the ramifications of obesity in regards to morbidity, to include diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and coronary heart disease. There are many treatments, diet centers, and surgery available for the treatment of obesity. I've had patients undergo bariatric surgery, and while this may work for some patients, there are other patients who will lose significant weight and then within a few years gain that weight back. I have seen with significant weight reduction the resolution of hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and diabetes in these patients, but only for those medical conditions to return when they regain their weight. The reason for the failure of these programs is that the underlying problem of overeating has not been treated. Obesity leads to significant mortality, and in my practice of 37 years, I've had many 80 and 90-year-olds and cannot think of anyone who is morbidly obese in that age group. I wonder where they all went. Compulsive eating beyond one's ability to deal with it by self-control is oftentimes the problem. These patients can be candidates for the 12-step program of Overeaters Anonymous. Overeaters Anonymous, or OA, for compulsive eating is patterned closely with Alcoholics Anonymous for persons who suffer from compulsive drinking problems. The same 12 steps and support methods are used by both groups. As with AA, there are no dues or fees for people who work the Overeaters Anonymous program. I've also seen testimonials that people suffering from eating disorders such as bulimia, binge eating, and purging can successfully be treated through the OA program. 3 members of Overeaters Anonymous will share their experience of how they have used the steps and support from the program to achieve their goals in a healthy relationship to eating, a healthy body weight, and even a better way of living. I will now turn the program over to our 3 panelists, Rick, Pat, and Debbie, who will briefly share their experience with Overeaters Anonymous. And afterwards, there will be a period for questions and answers with the panelists. Also, we have Dr. Lee Tucker, who is a retired internist with over 30 years of experience dealing with eating disorders and the usefulness of Overeaters Anonymous in this population.
All right. Hi, my name is Rick. I'm a compulsive overeater.
Hi, Rick.
And by the grace of God and the 12-step program of Overeaters Anonymous, I haven't found it necessary to have an eating binge for 2,388 days, one day at a time. I'm going to save you all the math. That's 6 years. For this, I am very, very grateful. I've been a healthy body weight for 5 years. That never happened before in my adult life. There are 4 things that I must do in order to work this program. I have to turn to God for help. I have to work the steps, the 12 steps of Overeaters Anonymous. They're the same as the AA 12 steps, but we're talking about compulsive overeating. I have to be in the group Overeaters Anonymous, and I can never, under any circumstances whatsoever, touch my binge foods. I have strange things happen to me if I eat those foods. I can't stop eating them. It's not a pretty sight. And then you may be asking yourself, Is Rick really compulsive overeater? He looks pretty healthy body weight. Well, let me tell one of my eating stories. There are many. I'm not going to bore you with more than one. At least 20 different times, I would eat 20 Fiber One food bars. That is lunacy. That is unadulterated lunacy. Even if somebody did it one time, why would you do it a second time? Why would you put a bunch of boxes of Fiber One food bars in your grocery bag? It doesn't make any sense. That's what happens in the brain of a compulsive overeating. It doesn't matter. You've had all these eating binges, but you think, I'll be okay. I'll just have 1 or 2 bars. And then when I eat them, I trigger an abnormal physical reaction. Now, if when you honestly want to, you cannot quit entirely, or if when you're eating your binge foods, you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably a compulsive overeater. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Now, also talking about that phenomenon of craving, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of binge foods on these compulsive overeaters is the manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs to the average temperate eater. These allergic types can never safely use binge foods in any form at all. I have an abnormal physical reaction to my binge foods, and I have a brain that has a problem because I will eat them if I would, and I think this time it'll be okay. Right thinking follows right action. And I would also tell you that good health is never on sale. There's no shortcut to good health. If somebody tells you they know a shortcut, I think they're fibbing to you. And the concept that right thinking follows right action, when I started eating nutritious foods that weren't binge foods, over time, I got to the point where I actually like those foods. I enjoy those foods. And the longer I eat them, the sillier it looks to eat my binge foods, which are very harmful to me. Same thing goes for exercise. Years ago, I was fortunate enough to get bit by the exercise bug when I was exercising. That's the same thing with your phone calls or going to meetings. Your thinking is going to come along when you do the right thing. That's been my experience. And I'm going to reiterate the 4 things that I have to do to be successful. Is I have to turn to God for help. I have to work all 12 steps of Overeaters Anonymous, not just the ones I like. I have to be in the group Overeaters Anonymous. Most people need the group to recover. Specifically do phone calls, work with a sponsor, go to meetings, and never, under any circumstances whatsoever, do I touch my binge foods. Pass.
Thank you for sharing. Can you pause?
No.
Do you want
Go,
feedback?
go.
Okay. Good morning. Hi, my name is Pat V. I'm a compulsive overeater in recovery.
Hi, Pat.
My disordered eating started in childhood, got worse in my teens, and progressed in my adulthood. Initially, I could control my weight by a succession of different diets and in between periods of overeating. But as I got older, the diet stopped working. In fact, I found if I tried to diet, I actually gained weight because of my increased focus on food. This led to great despair, facing the fact that I was then morbidly obese and unable to do anything about it. I was also humiliated because, as a board-certified family physician, I had full knowledge of the medical consequences of morbid obesity. I also had watched family members die of sequelae of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and other comorbidities. And every time I went to see my own doctor for blood work, I dreaded the results. I fully expected to be diagnosed as a diabetic. How did I respond to this fear? I either lived in denial, sedating myself with food, or I resigned myself to the fact that I would die morbidly obese, most likely of conditions related to morbid obesity. However, because my faith in God has always been important to me, despite the fear and the great despair, I continued to have a glimmer of hope. I kept praying for a solution. When I shared many years ago with a trusted spiritual director, he advised me to seek the answer to why I overate. And he suggested I join a 12-step group. When I first approached Overeaters Anonymous, I didn't have the willingness to do whatever it took to recover. I kept going to meetings week after week. I didn't lose any weight because I didn't change what I ate. But I must have heard hope in the rooms because I kept going. And it was several years I kept going. Eventually, however, I joined a different kind of OA meeting that was based on the book Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a phone meeting. And I began to hear the testimony of hundreds of people on the line that talked about that they reacted to certain foods differently than normal eaters. They reacted the way an alcoholic reacts to alcohol. I also learned through workshops that my brain reacted differently to certain foods than that of normal eaters. There was actually MRI evidence that my brain reacted differently. I started entertaining the idea that I might need to change what I ate and give up the foods I could not eat in moderation, which were my trigger foods. Initially, I did not want to do that, but I slowly and eventually realized that I had to consider this. I really didn't think I'd be able to do it. But gratefully, I found a local OA group. I had been attending the one over the phone that was countrywide. But I found a local group in Knoxville which gave me the courage and support to change. I experienced firsthand that when I ate sugar, the craving to eat when I wasn't hungry was almost constant. When I did not eat sugar, I experienced a peace with food that I didn't know was possible, and the weight began falling off. With the support of my group and my sponsor, I stopped eating sugar-laden foods on January 19th, 2015. Since that date, I approach abstaining from sugar just like an alcoholic does abstaining from alcohol, one day at a time. In less than a year, I was down over 70 pounds. I plateaued after that weight loss and soon realized I needed more. I needed to work the 12 steps to deal with my emotionally motivated eating. I also realized that perfectionism was as much a problem for me as my sugar addiction was. I needed to give up finding the perfect food plan and executing it perfectly. After giving up perfectionism imperfectly and working the step with my sponsor, I was able to lose additional weight, bringing my total loss to over 100 pounds. What is my life like now? I have so many gratitudes, it's difficult to count them. As I approach my 70s, and I hate saying that out loud, because I really think I'm in my 40s, but I feel younger and more active than I have for many decades. I'm able to run and play with my grandchildren, hike with my husband, walk my golden doodle, and go up and down stairs without a second thought. My emotions are much more stable. I'm able to focus more on others' needs instead of focusing so much of my time on my weight and food. Instead of dreading my blood work, my doctor gives me high fives for maintaining a stable weight and great labs. I have great hope for my future, which has replaced the despair. Am I cured? No. I need to work my program every day, one day at a time. I still sometimes have sick thoughts about food and imperfect actions, but now I have a group of people that support me and truly care. They are available when I need extra support. I have the tools of the OA program that I can turn to instead of the food. Instead of being perfect, I can take the next right baby step. Now, one day at a time, I am much more hopeful, with more confidence and less struggles. I am very grateful to God that my prayers were heard. Recently, my husband, who has faithfully stuck with me through this journey, shared with our mutual doctor, she's a totally different person now. The biggest difference is the freedom I've found. I am free from the obsession with food. This gives me the freedom to love. And I pass. And now we'll hear from Debbie.
Yes. My name is Debbie. I am a compulsive overeater, a bulimic, and an anorexic.
Hi, Debbie.
I was a very fearful and anxious child who developed self-soothing behaviors as an infant. As soon as I was chastised for that behavior, I would stop it and go on to another behavior. By the age of 4 years, I found that food comforted me, and I became overweight then. As I grew, I was not the typical child growing up in the 50s. I was mercilessly teased and taunted by other children and even by adults. By age 11, I started dieting and became obsessed with my weight. I spent almost 2 decades going up and down in weight. I missed something. No, by age 11, I started dieting and became obsessed with my weight. I spent almost 2 decades going up and down. In my late 20s, I discovered that I was infertile as a woman and a complete failure as a woman, and I blamed my body. I hated my body. I vowed that I would do anything to satisfy my desires for food and never be fat again. And that's when I became bulimic. At times, my depression was so severe, I lost my appetite and developed anorexia. On the other hand, when I felt more anxious, I would binge eat and then purge. These behaviors continued for almost 50 years. During that time, I never told anyone because of my distrust of people. I was ashamed and fearful of humiliation. Even though I was in therapy for many of those years, I didn't change. I continued with my disordered eating. I was usually in the range of a normal weight, so no one really suspected, as far as I knew. But also during that time period, I once ignored my embarrassment and mustered the courage to mention my problems with food to a primary care doctor. He immediately stood up, showed me the door, and said to call him if I had any other concerns. It devastated me, and it took me another 25 years to ever mention it again. But things changed early in 2021 when my depression became unbearable. I was at the end of my rope. My internist brought up the option for me to talk to a therapist. I opened up to the therapist. She encouraged me to admit my secret to my internist, which I then did. And they encouraged me to seek the help offered by Overeaters Anonymous. Well, after a few months, I took the huge step and walked into that first OA meeting. My fear left me when I was welcomed by a room full of people who understood and accepted me with love just as I was. They taught me that I was not alone and that they would share my journey to recovery. I started working the 12 steps. It was after step 3 that I had a spiritual recovery. I was able to let go of my past resentments toward God and people who had hurt me, and that's including myself. I accepted that my higher power would remove my lifelong compulsion with food. The miracle of stopping binging and purging happened within 1 month of that very first meeting and has continued for over 10 months now. It was through the love, understanding, and encouragement of my fellows in OA that I learned to trust. I found peace and happiness I never knew before. I am so grateful to my healthcare provider for directing me to OA. I now have hope and interest in my future. I feel so blessed to have had this experience. I've learned to love and trust others. I feel like my life has just begun.